Welcome. We have an amazing speaker this week. I'm very excited. So most of our speakers I've known pretty well. Alexandra or Alex?
Alex is good.
Alex and I have spoken on the phone a few times. We are connected because my future brother-in-law is your CFO. But you have been described as a badass by several people with whom I've spoken. She is, I would say, our most, of all the speakers we have, probably I'm the most impressed by overall what she's accomplished as an entrepreneur, right? Technically. Enormous challenge that she's taken on. I don't want to spoil anything because she's a very, very interesting career path that we'll get into. But without further ado, here's Alex. Take a seat there. All right, Alex, welcome.
Thank you.
So, okay, we always like to start about your background. I will briefly say that you are, first tell us about overall your title and what you do.
So I am the founder and CEO of Caban Systems. We design and manufacture software-enabled energy storage systems for the telecommunication infrastructure. So that means any 5G deployment that's going off in rural areas or increased coverage pretty much worldwide. We are the primary source of power in most cases, and we deploy our systems throughout the world, actually.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I read your website. It was really complicated. Spent a lot of time trying to understand exactly. Can you break that down for us kind of more simply? Like, how does your company, as far as an energy company, battery company, what do you do like in the value chain overall compared to other energy companies?
Yeah, absolutely. So we, the area that we focus on is we are for all intents and purposes, a battery manufacturing company. Most of us come from the automotive world, have either worked at electric vehicle companies, either on the design side or on the manufacturing side. And so we focus on the design of the power electronics, the mechanical aspect of the equipment, and then we manufacture it. So in a nutshell, we're an end-to-end solutions provider for companies like AT&T, Telefonica, and Urido, different parts of the world. And we are a small line item in their supply chain. So they go to companies like Ericsson to buy radio base stations. So this would be 5G LTE equipment, and we provide power to that equipment. And so we become pretty important because every minute that the radio base station is down is a revenue loss for bigger companies. And so right now, if they want to troubleshoot something in the field, they have to send a person out to the middle of nowhere. And in most cases, as you can probably see, antennas are spread out. They can be in urban areas, they can be up in mountaintops, and usually we want it in mountaintops to get a big range of service. And in order to do that, you have to send somebody out to troubleshoot the equipment. And so we provide an ability to monitor it remotely and then be able to bi-directionally speak to the equipment and then that way manage it. And so we entered this space thinking we were only going to be a product company, and then we ended up being a product and services company. I can dive a little bit deeper into that if you want.
Sure, absolutely. You guys, as always, questions if you have them, please.
Caban Systems, C-A-B-A-N, Systems.
Okay, so we need to pass the microphone around. This is going to fall off. I got more complaints that the webcast people couldn't hear your questions. So, microphone person, can we get one of those? Oh, thank you. There you go. Is this working? No. Is this working? All right, yeah. So, questions, please use this. Okay. Any others? I'm sure we'll get more in a minute.
I'm just curious, what type of battery technologies do you guys use?
Mainly lithium, or not mainly, but lithium. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Tim. I'm a graduate student here studying electrical engineering and computer science. I did a bit of research into 5G and some of the challenges with rolling it out. There's a million of them. But projected installations for antenna arrays are of 800,000 in the next 5 years. How does that scale for a startup? I guess that seemed like a little bit small for me to pursue. How have you framed that to investors about how you're going to scale with only 800,000 units?
Just to give you a rough sense, 800,000 units would be roughly about 2 billion in revenue.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I guess most of those are concentrated in local areas. So, are you also putting battery power in cities, or is it just for rural areas?
No, it's both. So we started off, in sort of talking a little bit about product market fit, we decided to tackle all of the no-brainers. So these are towers. If you drive from here to Vegas, you'll see all the different telecommunication towers all being off-grid, because it doesn't make economic sense for anybody to pull electric lines all throughout those highway systems. And so you have telecommunication towers out there being completely run on diesel generators. And so as a company, we decided it's much easier for us to compete with diesel generators because return on investment is a lot higher. And so we started off with tackling the 20% of towers that are all off-grid. That way we can gain economies of scale, bring our costs down, go through cost reduction exercises, increase our automation throughput of the plant, and then be able to offer a lower solution for urban areas for 5G deployments. And so those systems would be, we could deploy up to about 40 systems a week at scale, at volume.
Thank you.
Any others?
Can you talk, I don't know anything about your field of expertise, but can you talk about the services that you said you now have to offer?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me to answer that, I need to give you context. We initially said, well, we're in Silicon Valley, we're a technology company. Most of us, actually all of us, are engineers. And we said we were going to make the best product out there that's going to not only disrupt the industry, but it's going to make it's really going to save up to 80% of the expense of our customers. And what ended up happening is when we started quoting items X works, that means we're responsible up to the manufacturing and everything out of our door. We provide manuals, we provide instructions as to how to operate it, how to install it. Our customers turned around and said, this is beautiful, but we don't know how to install it, so you do it. And so we turned around and looked at our numbers and we said, okay, let's do it. And then they said, well, if you want your warranty to be void, or you want your warranty to stay still, you have to maintain it. And so they turned around and said, we don't know how to do that. Can you do that for us? And so we ended up now we're an end-to-end complete solutions provider. So we make products and we install projects. And so I have an entire field services team based in Mexico City who does pretty much all of our installs.
Okay.
So you said for the no-brainers that run on diesel engines, are you just alongside those diesel engines you install the battery systems?
So we replace them all together. So we generate power through solar, and then we store through our systems, and then we deploy in DC. So the neat thing about it is that we're able to, we have a site master controller that for all intents and purposes, it makes all decisions on how to consume power.
Why specific to 5G? Why is that?
No, we're not specific to 5G. We have towers from 2G all the way to 5G. 2G is what you used in the past of just voice, no data. So we don't have a preference. You have a power requirement, we satisfy it.
Yeah, but how come the telecom industry then would eventually?
That is an interesting question, because most of us, again, like I said before, we all came from the automotive industry, and I was personally looking at what other areas battery engineering could be applied to. At that point, we had launched 3 different battery programs altogether for vehicles. And I was sort of tired from just the notion of releasing batteries to vehicles, and so where else can battery be applied to? And we looked at multiple applications: ferries, planes, stationary, like different ones. And then in one afternoon, I was at a dinner, and I overheard somebody complaining about the diesel genset. And I turned around and I started asking questions about why and where, and just in general curious. And then I found out that there's this whole world of telecommunication infrastructure that you pick up your phone and you don't really know what all the supply chain required is, so that you have the luxury to pick up your phone. And that was really intriguing, because there's a lot that needs to happen in order for you to just have access to data transfer or be able to send a text.
Okay. So I usually spend a good amount of time about like your career journey, blah, 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 but this is much more interesting. So in this case, I do want to quickly ask you about your career, though. Because I want to, understand how you got an interest in batteries and how you, and obviously I think we'll get into your work experience, but you went to undergrad at Rice, and what did you study there?
I did civil and environmental engineering with a focus in energy policy.
Okay, energy policy. And then you came to Berkeley for your master's in engineering, or master's of science in engineering, right? Yeah. Okay, and what was the thought when you came here?
Harder than Rice, I'll say that. I spent a lot of nights in that building. I started off with a focus in aquatic chemistry, wanting to do physical-chemical kinetics, so removal of heavy metals from groundwater. I was at Berkeley National Lab working on some technologies to do so, and there's a lot of challenges with international students in the United States, in that most of us cannot get a proper job after any STEM career because of visa issues, and so that forced me to get really creative about what I wanted to do. And so, believe it or not, I worked at Berkeley National Lab for a little bit, and then decided to go down to Silicon Valley and say I want real experience of bringing a product not only in a theoretical value but actually into the commercializing the product. And because that's a challenge in itself, that's an art, to be honest. And so I did that a couple of times, and the only reason I got in there is because when I was interviewing, nobody could catch my accent. And so not until the final paperwork, they were like, oh, you're not American. And it was by pure luck that I got at that job. And then it sort of evolved. I got a lot of lessons learned into raising capital. I mean, most of us in the engineering world, we have no idea how that works. And so I think working at a few startups helps you grasp of what you want to do, and it was specific in an engineering field that always went back to the idea of wanting to remove diesel from the environment, remove pollutants from the environment. That's always been the theme, no matter what I've studied or what I've done or where I've created. It's always been with the idea of how do we progress technology into the different sectors, and then ultimately how do we get it cross-border so that it doesn't just stay in the U.S. and it benefits every country.
Can somebody close that door, please? Thank you.
Could you talk some more about your time at Berkeley Lab? Like, how long were you there, and did you think it was useful in advancing your career?
I was there for a year. It was useful in the sense that it forced me to work with my hands. It was useful in the sense that you asked yourself, you posed questions, pretty existential questions on yourself, in the way that I would argue in any corporate role you wouldn't have the luxury to do that. And so It forces you to think about the questions that you want to ask yourself, about the answers, about the way that you want to work. And so I spend a lot of time framing what I wanted to work on, which it forces you to think about the right problems as opposed to, just going into a specific field and working for the sake of working.
By the way, where are you from?
I'm originally born and raised in Guatemala.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm David. Thanks for being here. I think it's really interesting that you said you minored in energy policy.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct? You minored in energy policy, and now you're in the energy field. And yet, I haven't heard you yet talk about green energy, clean energy. Yet, that seems to be the product that you're delivering.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a reason that you don't frame your company as a green company? And do you take into account in your business model maybe savings that these telecommunication companies might be given via tax cuts or whatnot?
That's a great question. And I think it's silly because we're in 2019 and I can't believe that I still have to put the word clean in front of energy. Energy should be clean. That should be a default. And that's the way that we're presenting ourselves as we should be your first option. If you look at the economics of it, and not only from an impact perspective, but also from a economic perspective, you're much better off with a clean solution than you are with what you're currently using. And so I think with a lot of our customers that are big corporate customers, using the word clean sometimes, just because of historical context, they've equated to a higher cost item. And so we come in as saying, we're going to reduce your operational expenses by 80%. How we get there is a different story. And so I think long way to answer your question is really, it depends who we're talking to. If I am talking to an operations person, they don't really care. So as long as the tower is up, and so as long as I'm cutting costs, that's what they care about. Then, if I go to somebody in the finance world or even the sort of more executive level, my first 10 minutes of the conversation, it's all about emission reductions and how can you leverage that story, and then how can you help your company be better and the image. And then ultimately what I said before is they're providing a services to all of you, which is, AT&T, they're all providing services. And so that benefit gets passed on to you. And so we do talk about it. It just depends how and when.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sean. Thank you for being here. So I know that your company primarily deals with lithium-ion batteries, and that's most likely your passion. And I was curious if you think that lithium-ion batteries are the future of energy storage, and if you've ever came across hydrogen storage and that sort of thing. I'm just curious because I did my undergrad capstone on hydrogen storage and kind of saw how infeasible it was. So I'm curious to hear your opinion on battery storage versus other methods and why battery storage may be the future.
Yeah, I hope that in 20 years or in 15 years, you and I are having this, you and I are not talking about lithium-ion ideally. That's the goal, is that there is something better and we're progressing. But I think having those two conversations are important because you want something that's commercially viable today. And you want also to have people working in the lab making sure that there's something better for the future, something that's more dense, something that's easy to manufacture, because it's one thing that that's technically feasible, and then there's another thing if you can mass produce it in a way that your footprint's down and that it's cost competitive with everything else. And so yes, I think that lithium-ion is definitely the commercial solution today. I think hydrogen doesn't compete. I don't think it's viable. I don't think it ever will be. But I do hope that in the future is something better.
This is the most questions we've ever had for a speaker, and we're like 20 minutes in. But go ahead.
So I'm just thinking about another thing. AT&T, companies like AT&T are driven by how much money they make and how many customers they serve. People in rural areas, there's less populated, those areas. So traditionally with the rollout of 3G, 4G, we've seen most of that happen in cities. Why are they going to deploy out? Do you perceive them to deploy in rural areas at the same time as in cities, or are they going to do the same thing with 4G as with 4G?
It depends on the country. I'll take, for example, Mexico, because we work a lot, like most of my field operations team is in Mexico. We have about 15 units. We actually just commissioned one a couple hours ago in Mexico. And we work with Telefónica and ultimately América Móvil, which is Telcel, the biggest carrier down there. Just to give you a sense of scale, Telcel is responsible for telecommunications from Mexico all the way down to Argentina, which is roughly about 22x times the size of AT&T. And they have, in Mexico, they have a federal mandate to capture or to roll out a certain percent of coverage. And that is because there are communities that have absolutely no access. And so before they start rolling out 5G, that may or may not be on time, they're saying, well, we have to have coverage in these areas, because if you quantify it all, it still is a couple million people without access to anything. And so they're modernizing the 2G and bringing it up to LTE, which is data. And then they're also building their backbone infrastructure for wholesale, which is kind of a different model that I could go into, but it's a different telecommunication infrastructure model. But they do have incentives to roll out in rural areas. And in the States, companies like Microsoft, Facebook actually are funding smaller mobile network operators to go out to these rural areas. Think about it, they want more users. They want more users, and they can't penetrate more in urban areas. They have to go to rural areas.
Really? They have an investment case for actually...
It's called IPT, Internet para Todos, and it's partly funded by Telefónica, and the other half is Facebook. So it's rolling out a broader coverage in Peru. And so they're doing the same with other countries.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I think that's good or bad in entirety.
I think it's good.
Okay, that's good.
You know, it's people who... I think about the cases of, you know, there's a family in the middle of Cusco in Peru, and a woman can't go to school, can't go to work, or doesn't know how to read, or doesn't know how to write, and now all of a sudden you're giving her the option to do that online.
Right. Yeah, I don't doubt that. There was a John Oliver last week's episode of maybe a few months ago about like the proliferation of Facebook in Myanmar, and how, like, you know, unregulated, when it enters new industries, like if misinformation can spread so rapidly in an area that's not prepared for it.
Oh yeah.
That's most of my.
Okay, now I'm talking about infrastructure.
Yeah.
I stayed in infrastructure.
Yeah, totally different topic. Okay, did we have? Yeah.
So for the partnership in Peru with Facebook and the telecommunication companies, so how does that work? Is it like Facebook, they get like free access to Facebook if they use like the certain like telecommunication software? Because I think that's how they do it, and like that's how Facebook grew in like other like rural areas, I think.
You know, I don't think I'm well positioned to answer that. I don't know. All we provide power to the systems, and how you use Facebook, I don't want to get into that. We promote we go to these areas and we promote access to clean power, access to internet, and that's where we leave off.
That's very funny. I'm not responsible for whatever happens.
I was curious if you could talk a little bit about like your journey into entrepreneurship. Like, why did you want to become an entrepreneur? And yeah.
Sure. I think it.
You can sit down. They can pass the mic around. You want to sit? Gotcha.
Sweet. Yeah, I think it started when I was probably 5 or 6. I grew up in a household of all entrepreneurs. My father was is an entrepreneur. My grandfather on both sides. So all I really knew was, oh, you grow up and you have a company, and that's it. And yeah, I saw my father hustle like 4 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day, and I grew up seeing that. So for me, it was very obvious that that's what you do. You come up with good ideas, but that the ideas solve a problem or a need. You didn't build a company for the sake of building a company. You built it so that you're solving something. And so my older sister's also an entrepreneur, very successful. She's headquartered in London, and I think coming to the U.S. shaped that, made me be a little bit more intelligent with respect to the way that we make decisions, and just get a little bit more prepared with respect to ability to lead teams and financing and all of that. And so I think it was a really organic move, but yeah, I think it's always been in my books, and in fact, I was probably never a good employee. I'm surprised I didn't get fired a couple times, but yeah. Yeah.
So the actual company that you worked at was Proterra, you said?
Proterra. So that it's a company based out of actually here in the Bay Area. They were designer and manufacturers of electric buses. So pretty much all the transit buses that you see, all the buses that you see on the 101 that are Google-based double deckers. So we designed and also manufactured big lithium-ion batteries for heavy-duty equipment. So that's trains, all the subway systems in New York. Daimler and Volvo had their double-decker buses redesigned by us, all of their electric vehicle ones. And actually, that's how I met my co-founder at the previous company.
So what was your actual role in the company?
It changed. It changed a couple times. I was there for about 5 years. But I was technical NPI, so new product introduction, program manager. So that means anywhere from ideation all the way through production. I would lead big projects. So that's any new product, charging infrastructure, V2G, software, telemetry, 2 battery programs, and then a couple of vehicle-wide programs. So that's anywhere from the electric chassis up, we would deploy.
Okay, and when sorry, go ahead. Actually, you know what? Let me have you hold that question for 2 seconds because I want to continue this. Okay, so you met your co-founder at Proterra, and were you looking to start a company when you guys started talking, or was it what was the discussion? Like, we have an idea, we want to get out of here, like we can do this better on our own, or how did that go? How'd you find each other? How'd you know you wanted to start a company?
So we were on the same team. We reported to the same person, but he was director of systems and applications. So this means you would take a single system and then you would apply it to different things. And we always got along very, very well. We made multiple trips up to Daimler in Germany, and we got along very well from the beginning. He's about 22 years older than me, but we got along really well, and we were always the first ones in, last ones out in our team. And I remember after having that discussion about the diesel gensets in the back, I started poking around and doing some market validation, talking to a few people, doing some back of the envelope math. And I pulled him to the side and I said, I'm starting this. Do you want to come? And so, yeah, it took him 2 days to say yes. And then we started our journey there.
So you were still at Proterra when you
Yes.
overheard that kind of comment about 5G systems. And so how long after you heard that did it take for you to kind of, were you still in the kind of market research phase?
Yes. So I was still working at Proterra during that time. And so as long as the state of California encourages people to think outside the box, actually, and you're able to, so as long as you work outside of your, you can be working on any project that you want, so as long as it's on the weekends and it's off hours, not on the computer. And so we were always brainstorming in the weekends and, grabbing a beer and things like that. And at some point it became more serious, and then I decided to go out and raise money. So I was still working when I was raising money, and then I closed it, and then I quit that day.
Oh my God. Okay. Go ahead.
So that was actually my question. The co-founder, when you decided that you wanted to ask him, do you feel like having a personal trust with him was a big factor in that? And, giving pretty much your idea to him, was that a worry of yours, saying, oh, you know what, this guy's in a better position than me to do this and could possibly leave me out? Was that ever something that you were concerned about?
It's a good question. No, I had a lot of trust in him, and ultimately his personality and mine are so different that I could never do this without him, he could never do this without me. And so I think that was very clear from the beginning. So in the 2 years that we've worked together, we haven't had a single issue, which is really odd.
Could you talk a little bit about your go-to-market strategy? I know it's super slow and bureaucratic industry.
Yeah. So I'll give you a little bit of more context as to who our actual customers are. So yes, it's AT&T. AT&T, the company, mobile network operators, typically don't own the infrastructure in which they put their antennas on. And so our customers end up being both the mobile network operators and the tower companies. And so our go-to-market plan was, hey, let's go to the infrastructure owners, because we don't have to go through a vendor qualification process with tower companies. So our goal was to get 10 pilots up and running with tower companies, and then be able to transition those into bigger orders. And meanwhile, in parallel, we would be speaking to companies like AT&T, like Sprint, and then go through the process of getting added as a qualified vendor. And when I say qualified vendor, they take your equipment and they destroy it in their lab, and make sure it doesn't go into thermal runway, make sure that it has security systems on it. And so you have one chance with them. And if there's any issues that come up, you're disqualified as a vendor. And so we wanted to make sure that we were moving forward with those kind of two approaches. And so we got all of these tower companies to say, yes, we'll buy your equipment, mainly because we're able to actually centralize the use of power. So 10 years ago, every mobile network operator had its own operating tower. And then laws changed a little bit where all operators were able to actually co-locate into a single tower. So when that happened, everybody sort of brought on all of their old equipment. So you saw multiple generators in a single tower, multiple tower batteries in a single tower, just really inefficiencies across the entire system. So we centralized the use of power, and we actually deliver power to every operator, and they charge them at the end of the month. And so when we sold that model, everybody, all the tower companies were really excited because they pay on for a footprint basis. And so our go-to-market plan was, let's tackle those and then move forward into competing in like bigger RFPs with actual operators or carriers.
So I am curious, like, just how, I mean, the capital costs are very high in the energy industry. I remember I met with a company when I was still in grad school called Sole Focus that had, I think, $150 million in funding is what they told us when we were there. And then I remember checking on them 6 months later and they were out of business and they were gone, which I thought was amazing.
Well, I don't know what they were doing.
Yeah, I know. And it's funny because we went there as part of our graduate school tour. And they told us this amazing story about how well they were doing, and then they were gone. But the idea of like everything you're describing is an enormous like capital cost, all these different things. This is very different than running a software company. And I was at a VC a few weeks ago and I asked them, why do they stay away, most of them at least in Silicon Valley, from kind of hard tech or things like this? And they said that software, the margins are higher, so we just tend to invest there.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as fundraising, as far as starting this, right, you need capital to even start this. How do you even demonstrate that you have a technology in order to get funding? Like, what is the first thing you do as an engineer to even get there?
That's a really good point. Your last point is a really good one because I started off as an engineer and then now I'm a finance person. And initially, you try to get your beta or your very, very first product in a very inexpensive way. Our version of inexpensive was at my co-founder's garage testing the equipment with the same plug as his wife's oven. So we tried to do it really, really inexpensive, like very inexpensive. And we got a product that was, for all intents and purposes, it worked. That took us, a couple of, maybe 2 or 3 months to get just that one product. But
which was what, a battery?
Which is one battery. But at the end, one battery that did what we said it would do. So it was representative. It was representative of what we wanted to do. However, during my conversations when I was initially raising capital, they didn't require us. They didn't require to see that first article. It was mainly validation from the industry that this was a product that was actually needed and that there was a market for it. And so how do you tell the narrative and the storyline around there's a problem, we have the technical capabilities to solve it, we know how to produce it, and we know that it's going to sort of save money. And guess what? I have 5 people that can prove that. And so it's really how do you tell the narrative around the problem that you're trying to solve, and then put swags around this is what I think it's going to cost me to as a startup cost to doing that. And every single time that we've set a budget, we haven't met it. And so meaning, we're off a little bit, but in general, if you've done this in the past, you would have known mostly what things cost. And then you made a really good point in that a lot of VCs, especially in Silicon Valley, want to invest in software companies that are, for all intents and purposes, easy. I mean, if something happens on the software side, any other company other than the financial transactions, if something happens, you put things up, you maybe lose a couple customers, you fix it. If something happens on our side, I kill somebody. And so, we're installing pieces of equipment in really remote areas up in a tower. This is high power, high voltage. Like it's challenging, but I think it's very high risk, high reward type of approach. And so, knowing that it's a very challenging space to be doing hardware, to be doing software on top of it. Software is maybe 10% of what we do. And then the services portion, we went to a lot of startup or a lot of VCs around the Bay, and it wasn't pretty. Like we got rejected quite a few times. I got questioned in many directions. And then I went to impact funds saying, well, to your point, this is a solution that's better for the environment. This is gonna, help the industry. This is gonna help the whole planet as a whole. And people were wanting to do equity buyback, which is something you don't want to do initially. And then, I could go on. And then we went to this big infrastructure funds, and they were saying, we'd love this. We'll give you $500 million. And so, buy the whole company out at that point. So none of these were the right fit at all. And I think the lesson learned there was initially when you first start doing this, you have to really plot out your narrative around not only what you need, but what do other people, how do other people perceive you, and what do other people want? Because they, at the end of the day, they have to tell their limited partners what sort of return they can expect on their own investment in the fund. And so we have to really think about it from their perspective and their lenses too. And so I think it was a combination of, we went to a strategic investor, and then we actually got funded by the California Energy Commission to bring up a production line. So.
Hi. So you mentioned how you started out as an engineer, and that said now you're a finance person. How did you start learning about, how to make judgment calls on who you want investing on your company, and all that kind of stuff?
That's a good question. I think it depends on the time. If you're in a pre-Series A, which is a kind of a seed round, you want to make sure that the people who you're inviting are folks you would want to spend a weekend with. You would want to share the good news and the bad news, not somebody you're trying to dread or run away from. I don't think, because they always come back, whether you want it or not. They come back when you need permissions to do something. They want to come back when you're doing your next company. And so initially, it's less about how much value they can add, and more about is this a person I genuinely like, or is this a person in a fund that I genuinely like? And then as you get bigger, you wanna make sure that your long-term goals align, and that companies don't have you focusing on things that are not for the best interest in the company. And so I think that's more from a holistic perspective. And then from a financial perspective, you just got to get really smart about how to negotiate properly. I think, I took I took the notion of the devil's in the details quite closely, because everything can seem really good in the surface, and then once you get into the contract and all of that, it gets interesting.
We talk a lot here about product market fit. We've had a bunch of different entrepreneurs that are here talking about how they evaluated whether they had something. Some have said, ask your users. We had Han Jin up here who has a camera company. He said, honestly, everything they tell you in these business classes, Steve Blank, it wasn't helpful, right? Because you get a different answer from everybody. I guess when you were developing your technology, how did you know you had something that people wanted? Did you, I heard the description that you had, so you built this thing. I'm really interested in that concept that you had, and it doesn't seem like you iterated on it a lot, right?
Yeah, I would say, well, first things, I've never taken a business class in my life, which was, I think, a good thing, because I didn't have a bias. I just genuinely went out, and I did speak to a lot of people in the industry, maybe something that was fairly representative of what the issue was. And so I think first things first, you talk to somebody who would use your product, number one. And then I think number 2 is you sort of come up with a requirements document for what a product should actually do, how it should perform, how it should behave, safety features around it, how much do you think it should cost, all of these things. What's the reliability on it, what's the serviceability on it. And then, but we did end up pivoting a little bit, because initially we said, well, the industry has a bunch of lead acid batteries all over the world. Those are kind of old generation. Let's swap them out for lithium. There's a big enough market. That's pretty good. And we pivoted from that because in this industry specifically, nobody really just wanted a swap of batteries. They wanted a whole system. They wanted something more intelligent. They wanted the possibility of generating power on site. They wanted their ability to remotely monitor these things. And so initially we didn't know this whole scope. So we started off being, okay, we want to design and manufacture battery packs. And then we said, okay, we want to no, we're not going to just get sales on that. That's not sufficient. We have to move to creating a system. And that only came from really maybe diving a little bit deeper on what the requirements and what the goals of savings were for these companies. And then we pivoted into products and services. And so I don't think we started off with the grand solution. We started off with something that was fairly representative of what the industry wanted. And so I don't think you have to have all of the answers on day one. I just think you have to be really smart about your representative scope. And some of that is you study it. Some of the other stuff you improvise on phone calls. And by improvising, I do not mean lying. By improvising, I mean, taking note of what they say and figuring it out. And so I think that's how we got better and better and better. And I think the ability to control all of this remotely, just like you would, like if you have for instance, a Tesla Powerwall, you would know I'm discharging this much, I'm charging this much, this is just general usage. We're actually able to tell exactly what each one of our towers is doing, regardless of where it's at. We have a system in Doha in Qatar, or one in Puebla in Mexico. We know exactly what it's doing at any given time.
It's really very cool.
Yeah. So first of all, I think it's amazing that you said a minute ago that VCs would just give you money without even asking to see a prototype or anything. I just think that's crazy that they just rely on you to do this really technically challenging thing. But you've taken the company now from plugging it in the wall where an oven was to now what seems like a very successful company. How has your role changed over time from that beginning to what it is now? And I guess quite frankly, why are you still in that role? Why not, move on and start another one?
Well, it's only been a year and a half.
Oh, really?
Yep. So it's only been a year and a half. That's mainly why. And I would say my role has not changed. I've just put more hours on my day. I started off working 10-hour days. Now we're pulling 16-hour days. And so I think the scope just grew. We grew with customers. We started off being 3 people. Now we will be 40 without contractors. So full-time with contractors and everything, we'll be probably about 100. My role has changed quite a bit. I think I've changed quite a bit. And I think I've just become smarter around where do I spend my time and delegating quite a bit. I'm still working on that. I don't think I'm there yet.
One second. Can somebody start an attendance sheet, actually? We lost one already. Can somebody? Thank you.
Have you ever had one of your batteries malfunction or have a really bad PR thing, like if a battery exploded or something?
Oh, no,
Or,
not that.
Or just like didn't work and you just really pissed off one of your customers?
You're being recorded.
And then how did you like handle that
Yeah.
PR mess?
Because we're on the record here, no, we never we put seven
sorry.
no problem, seven safety features in the battery, so that thermal runaway is a big no-no in any industry, in the energy industry. So thermal runaway is when you have a random failure, random cell have a side exposure or side rupture. This is, if you get to a point where you can't control that, you should probably go home. Yes, to answer your question, yes, that happened yesterday actually. We had an issue in the field when we were installing it, and we pissed the customer off because we shut off their main power line, and they lost service for about 4 hours, which would equate to about $19,000 of revenue loss. That we'll see what happens. So I'm in the middle of it.
We had a question back there.
I have two questions. The first one, about your journey as an entrepreneur. So you said when you were around 5 or 6 years old, somewhere down the line, you knew that you wanted to do something of your own. But did you also have an idea that this is the kind of area you want to focus on, or this is the kind of problem you want to focus on, or some sort of thing that you can identify yourself with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I alluded to this earlier, but for me, I grew up in the northern parts of Guatemala, areas really pristine, very virgin, pretty much all very tropical, and diesel was used everywhere. And for me, it was very obvious that what I wanted to do was work on problems, whether or not they were ever going to be successful. It didn't matter. At that point, all I wanted to do was work on energy-related problems that had to do with removing diesel from the environment. And so for me, it was a life and death thing. It was something that if I didn't focus on that, I wasn't accomplishing or really living up to my expectations of myself. And so, yeah, I think my mission was really clear, and I think that's it's something that it keeps the really hard days like yesterday in perspective.
And the second question, you said you work at Proterra for some time, and I just want to know why did you work out there for some time rather than just starting something out? Or
That's a good question. I think there's a lot of value that that can be added, and everybody's journey is different. I mean, you could of course be prepared in undergrad and be prepared before that, and then go off and do your own thing. Plenty of people have done it successfully. For me personally, I spent a lot of my time before Berkeley in athletics and playing athletics, and so playing sports, and so I was a varsity athlete, and so I was really focused on that. And so when my focus shifted, I realized that there were a lot of holes in my logic in my own behavior as a person that I didn't feel like they were quite up to par for me to make decisions. And so that's why I wanted to go off and have a couple of years of experience and in areas that I didn't necessarily study. So manufacturing, finance, sales, inventory management, random things, but the sum of all of those make you that much better.
Thank you.
Holes in your logic as far as just how you approach life, or about kind of your knowledge, your technical knowledge?
Both, very much both. I think at some point you become technical enough to do what you want to pursue, and then as a leader, as an entrepreneur, you hire people who are better than you at that specific thing. Like I'm never going to be the best power electronics engineer, or never going to be the best manufacturing engineer. And so you just hire really good people around those areas that are exponentially better than you. And I don't think it's about knowing everything perfectly. In fact, if that's your mentality, you're never going to get there. And so it's just about how to make this better decisions in areas that you don't have all the information. So that's what I mean by I didn't have the logic around how to make decisions in a really unknown areas or unknown spaces.
Can you tell us how that changed? How do you, like, for example, if you want to hire somebody that is in sales, and as the company scaled, right, if you're not maybe super fluent in sales or your decision-making process, how did that change? How do you approach these things now, kind of, as they say, known unknowns?
A couple of lessons learned where to stick with your example, is I've hired a lot of folks that didn't work out for the roles, and so some of it was trial and error, definitely. In some other cases, it was setting up frameworks and proper sort of during the process of actually hiring somebody, putting them into different use case scenarios, giving them, putting them on calls even though they know nothing about, or putting them into these different areas. And then I think there's a really interesting human, sort of cognitive human understanding of how do other people behave and what is your empathy towards not only your role, but your role as a function of others. And so there's a couple of I would say really specific examples that I can point to that have taught me how to better approach problems, and sort of really taking a step back. And the first things first is you want to listen. You want to sit there and then listen into all of the issues or all the things that come up. Ask questions, ask more questions, and then sit still. And then after collecting all the information, then sort of approach the issue in their shoes. So back to that empathy is, how would I answer these questions if I were in their shoes? And so I just think it's been really ever evolving, and not by any, I don't think I'm, again, there yet by any stretch of the imagination, but it's just made my eagerness increase, but my time to react slow down and be a little bit more thoughtful in my delivery and in my decision-making progress.
Anybody else? People on the webcast can't hear the questions.
Oh no.
And so.
Hi. So I'm Luis, and what you said earlier about the about wanting to work in energy, or else not feeling like you're living up to your own expectations, that really resonates with me. Personally, I don't care what I do in the future, so long as I hurt fossil fuels. So I wanted to ask you, what do you see as the future of energy? Whenever I talk to professors, they always say, well, the biggest challenges are storage and transmission. What's your take on that?
Oof. That's a really good question, and I think, like everything, it depends on what industry. Agriculture is very different than transportation. Transportation is very different than generation and storage and everything else. And it varies by country, unfortunately. And so I think right now we're at a point where the dollar per kilowatt hour is much expensive. Like to consume $1 per kilowatt hour of solar is always going to be the most inexpensive form of energy. And so I think that number is ever decreasing, and we're going to get to a point where solar is going to be the choice of energy. I think it has to be paired with it has to be paired with policy and ensuring that the way that you can generate power, you can actually sell it back to the grid. Like for instance, in most countries, in Mexico, this just got passed. So you can actually decentralize the way that you generate power and then be able to provide it as a wholesale. And so if you're generating power, you're generating 10 megawatts of installed capacity. And if you're selling that to the grid, you can actually be able to use it in different parts of the country and not just where it's generated. And so I think technology and policy have to be really, really tied together. I think back to my very, very initial point, which was we can't just expect policy and then materials to magically change the way that we think about energy. These things have to go hand in hand. We have to be able to implement policies and implement technologies today that are commercially available, like the things that we're doing. So the things that we're doing are not brainers. We're not inventing a new thin layered material. We're taking something that it's commercially viable and we can implement today. And so that's equally as important as everything else. And so in order for us to get to the goals that we set out, whether or not the U.S. is participating in the Paris Climate Agreement, there's other, I think the behavior of other industries and other countries has actually changed. We actually get inbound requests for, hey, we have to achieve these goals by these deadlines, help us achieve them. How do we achieve them? We're looking for companies that can help us achieve them. And so I think the behavior of people has actually changed in the past 4 years, because I've been in this industry for 12, and I think the behavior of people has actually changed. And so I think it's a mix of a couple things. It's existing technologies, new technologies, policies, people's behaviors, and then I can't emphasize this more, the fact that we need smart people, smart Berkeley people, to go and work in areas that matter, not in areas that are, I don't mean to be rude to any sort of software, commercial, or consumer products, but we don't need that. We don't need any more of that. We need smart people to be doing really important job of tackling hard problems, because there's a lot of really smart people working on problems that don't necessarily matter. And so we just need more people to get into these industries, to invest in companies that matter, to believe in companies that matter, and ultimately it will solve. We just need more people working on this.
I have to say, I've seen a shift myself in the last 3-4 years about what the students are interested in, definitely. 3-4 years ago, before that, it was very much, I think there was a craze about, honestly, building some type of consumer technology, Silicon Valley app or startup like that. But the last 3-4 years, there's been a big shift, and I've seen it in your class and the class before. People are very much inspired to try to find some very interesting technology out there for a lot of the problems we've been facing. And I will say, this is, again, personal judgment, having taught in the business school and the engineering school. And this landed really badly when I said this to the MBA students last week, which is that the difference between, in my experience, why I like these engineering students so much, is that the MBA students typically are looking to find ways to make a company to solve a business challenge to make money, right? That, a lot of the time at the end of the day, that's been my experience. But the engineering students are really inspired to find some type of technology to, do something bigger. I've seen it again and again. But, yeah. Okay, we'll let this be. I want to make sure she gets out of here on time because I know you guys are going to line up. Last question.
I can just ask this afterwards if anybody else has something.
Anybody? Okay, so I do want, like I said, I can guarantee you're going to get a very long line right now. I would like to thank you so much for coming. Let's give her a hand.
I'll say this one thing. We're hiring quite a bit. So if you're interested in working, we're based out of Burlingame. We have about a 20,000 square foot facility that we are ramping up. And so systems engineering, business, or whatever, the warehouse manager, come on over.
And my like I said, my future brother-in-law, who is super sharp, although don't tell him I said that, is her CFO.
Correct. Yeah.
So,
he's fantastic.
Yeah. Okay. Again, thank you so much. This
Thanks
was
for having me.
Incredible. It's one last thing.